Hi, welcome to the Interaxis YouTube channel and Interaxis.io. We're going to start talking a lot about the incentive structures, the incentives that have been built starting with Bitcoin and on into Ethereum and other decentralized finance tools that are giving us the ability to drive behavior the way we want it to, but these incentive structures also give us the ability, if you're an investor, if you're a user of DeFi, to actually grow your wealth, grow income, create more wealth for yourself, more income for yourself, create lending opportunities, borrowing, market making, liquidity pools, all of these things, and it all starts with this ability to create incentive structures that drive people to certain behaviors that we really want in the system. And it all, of course, started with Bitcoin, and it started with proof of work mining. Right, so now we have to take a step back and go, okay, what happened before Bitcoin? Because with Bitcoin and with proof of work mining, they had to figure out how to incent people to do the right behaviors. And what is the right behavior? Well, let's step back to our normal example, Adam and Ron, right? I write Ron a check for $100. Ron then goes and Ron trusts me that there's actually money in my bank account. Ron goes and deposits that in his Wells Fargo checking account. Okay, now they don't necessarily put the money in his account right away, right? What Wells Fargo does is they make a call over here to Adam's bank, Chase, and they say, hey, did Adam have this money available in his account? Chase says, yes, Adam did have the money available in his account. And Wells Fargo says, awesome, please wire us the money. And so they wire the $100 into Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo puts it into Ron's account. I am now minus $100. Ron is now plus $100, and that's how it works. Now, Wells Fargo gets paid, Chase gets paid. The processors in here, whether it's a SWIFT system, ACH, whatever it is, they get paid to move the money back and forth. So there's an incentive structure here. The banks are getting paid to keep track of this account, to keep track of that account, to keep track of this moving. There are a lot of parts here, and we had to outsource that ability. We had to outsource the ledger keeping capability and the transaction capability. We had to outsource all of that to banks and to other systems that move the money back and forth. This is incentive, right? They collect fees, right? So this is their incentive. They collect fees here. There are fees for the transfer, okay? This is incentive structure. They have to get paid to do the work, right? Well, Bitcoin said, all right, how can we mimic that and allow people to get paid for doing this work? Because other people are connecting their computers, they're downloading the Bitcoin code, they're contributing their processing power, their electricity, and we need all the members of this Bitcoin network to help us move these transactions and keep this ledger. So those are the behaviors we want. All right, so we need to give people these incentives to keep the ledger, right? The ledger is who has what, right? Adam has 1 Bitcoin. Ron, call it half a Bitcoin, okay? They have to keep the ledger. Everyone has to download the code and keep it and look at it. Then there is the transfer, or the transactions, right? Adam sends 1 Bitcoin to Ron. That's a transaction. We have to pay for that incentive. How are we going to do that? Because you have to connect your computer, you have to use electricity, you have to use processing power in order to actually keep this and make the transaction go. How are we going to do it? Well, first of all, you can't just connect. You also have to go through the algorithm. You have to go through the SHA-256 algorithm to actually create the hashes, and then you have to actually win and be able to process that block. Well, here's what you get. If you process the block, we're actually going to pay you in Bitcoin. So we're going to pay you to move our transactions around in the actual item, in the actual currency that you're moving around. That's actually pretty revolutionary. Now, we pay banks in dollars to move dollars around, that makes sense. But you don't pay me in dollars to move my dollars around. You don't pay me to make sure that not only did Ron get my money, but that I had my money, and then everyone else in the world who wants to send dollars actually gets their dollars where they need to go. So the idea of paying Bitcoin, which no one knew about at the time, for people to connect their computers and transact in Bitcoin and help with the transactions and move them back and forth and keep the ledger, and paying them in Bitcoin is actually a pretty revolutionary idea. And we have to think back to the faith that those that started this had to have, that Bitcoin would have some value. And in all honesty, they probably thought, this is fun, this is cool. Some of them probably said, yeah, this is going to completely upset things. But I'm guessing they had no idea it would be to this level and what it would bring. So the incentive structure, again, that says you will receive Bitcoin as a reward for doing this is pretty revolutionary. Plus, you're going to get transaction fees, right? Because we all know there are little transaction fees every time you move your Bitcoin. So whoever processes the block not only gets the block reward, but they also get the transaction fees. Now think about this. They had to think ahead and go, okay, eventually, from an incentive perspective, this block reward, as we tick down and as we have fewer and fewer Bitcoin being mined, being created with the block reward, we're going to have more and more people, we think, using Bitcoin, using it, using the transactions, moving it around the world. Therefore, we need eventually the transaction fees to go up and the block reward to go down. The transaction fees are not creating new Bitcoin, because they said we're only going to create so much Bitcoin. So over time, the block reward is going to go down. So the reward for actually processing these will go down over time. But we need those miners to still be there, because the most important thing is not creating new Bitcoin. The most important thing is actually moving it around, keeping the ledger and moving it around. So we need eventually the transaction fees to go up. So early on, we're going to seed the network. We're going to give such high block rewards, started with 50 Bitcoin per block and moved down to 25 and 12 and a half and now 6 and a quarter. But the thought is, as more and more people are transacting, we don't want the reward. We don't want to be producing so much more Bitcoin. We need more miners to come in, so we're going to give more Bitcoin early on for processing the blocks. And that's just Bitcoin that we're coming up with out of thin air. But eventually, there are going to be so many transactions that they're going to make their money on the fees, because there are going to be so many Bitcoin transactions going back and forth. Now we're not to that point yet, but look, now we're down to 6 and a quarter Bitcoin per transaction. The value of Bitcoin has gone way up, and so fees are starting to be more and more of the reward that the miners are getting. So as an incentive structure, again, this is pretty revolutionary, and a whole lot of faith in the early Bitcoin miners that this is going to produce something. Now, in reality, there weren't that many transactions, there wasn't that much code, so they could just connect a laptop or a desktop computer and start mining Bitcoin, right? And accidentally get 50 Bitcoin here, 50 Bitcoin there, and they've developed quite a stash of Bitcoin. Now, of course, we have monstrous $100 million mining farms trying to get those little block rewards and trying to get these fees. Now, those mining farms will have to keep going and sustaining us so that we can continue to transact Bitcoin even when the block reward gets cut in half again and half again and half again. And that's the hope, and that's the forward thinking of the incentive structure of Bitcoin and of proof of work. So in this, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the proof of work and the incentive structure that Bitcoin gave us and that started it. Now, again, they had to have a lot of faith that this would work. Once it worked and gave us blockchain technology, the idea that you have one block that gets hashed to create the next block that gets hashed to create the next block, and you gave us this idea of immutability. You gave us the trustlessness, because once you can distribute, once you can say all of these miners, all of these nodes are helping us to clear these transactions, are helping us move the Bitcoin back and forth. Now we don't need to outsource to that bank, right? Now we don't need to outsource to that third-party payment provider. We can just use the Bitcoin network because there's enough incentive out there for us to continue to have these miners that are just millions and millions of computers connected that are decentralized. Once we had that, once we showed that that could actually work, well, now we can build on it, right? So you take the idea of the trustlessness, the fact that since all these different miners are keeping the ledger and they all agree on what the ledger is, that I can't send Bitcoin unless I have Bitcoin. The idea of the privacy. I can send Bitcoin to this wallet over there, but I don't really know who it is, and it doesn't really matter because the Bitcoin is going to make it to that wallet. The fact that it's decentralized. There's no central parties, no central bank or central government deciding how much Bitcoin there is or controlling how it moves. So that part of it, the immutability, the fact that we can't go backwards in blocks, we can only go forward in blocks, that's a huge piece. The transparency, the fact that we can look at what happened at every block. Once you added all that and said, oh, the incentive structure worked, people believe enough that this incentive structure will work, that we can give them the incentive of actually the cryptocurrency that we created, and that will be enough. Now you've launched something. Now you have smart contracts and Ethereum and rewarding people for actually helping move the network forward, for helping create the network, build the network, move the transactions. And now people have thought of all sorts of new incentive structures to say, okay, in this trustless, decentralized environment, how are we going to give people the incentive for these other behaviors we need? So we'll walk forward into more of the incentive structures in future videos, but we'll walk into proof of stake and why that is important as an incentive structure. What kind of behaviors are we trying to get to? We'll walk through things like liquidity pools in decentralized finance. Why is that incentive structure there? We'll walk through staking in terms of griefing and being able to, and kind of putting your money where your mouth is and why that's so important. Disincentives are so important. What are the incentives for me not to have bad behavior and not to be a bad actor? And we'll kind of walk through those. But it all started with Bitcoin and the faith that some of those people had that yes, we're going to get paid in Bitcoin and we don't even know what it is and we don't know if there's going to be a market for it and it's going to be worth anything. But we're going to go ahead and connect our processor and download the code and just start processing Bitcoin transactions, and we'll see what happens. And it's gotten to this point where we say, okay, people are okay with getting some sort of incentive that is not purely dollars. And because of that, because we can distribute and decentralize the work, we can decentralize the incentive. And that is what's so important, that the fact that we can create an incentive, we can create people to do things in a decentralized way, because Bitcoin gave the ability and the faith that type of incentive structure would work. So we're going to be talking about incentives quite a bit here. Hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at Interaxis8. Send us an email, info@interaxis.io. Check out our website, and we will see you soon in the next video.